The world goes mad, and people tend to put the cause of its sickness down to man, sometimes even to one particular little man. Perhaps only a few months ago I would have thought like this myself about the existing outbreak of virulent insanity, but now I can't. I can't because of something which happened to me a little while ago. I was in Southern California working at Paramount. Most days I used to get to the studio about 10 and leave at 5:45, but on this particular evening, it was Wednesday, the 18th of June, I was a little late getting away. I went out through the front hall and hurried across the street to the garage. The entrance is a tunnelled archway. It was fairly dark in there, and I bumped square into a man who'd either been on his way out or standing there in the deepest part of the shadow. The latter didn't seem probable, but I had an odd sort of feeling that that was just what he had been doing. "Sorry," I said. I cut myself off short instead. I recognized him, but with the semi-darkness and the funny stiff way he was standing and looking at me, I couldn't place him. It wasn't one of those half memories of having once met someone somewhere. It was a definite, full-fledged memory which told me this man had been a friend closely knit into my particular life pattern, and not so long ago. He turned away, and something about the movement slipped the loose memory cog back into place. It was Charles Moffett. Charles, who had been a friend for 15 years. Charles, whom I hadn't seen or heard about since he'd gone east in a mysterious hurry 2 years ago. Charles, whom I was delighted to see again. Charles, who'd changed amazingly. Charles, as I realized with a shock, who must have been very ill. I shouted his name and leapt after him and grabbed him by the arm and swung him around to face me. "You old sucker," I said, "don't you know me?" He smiled with his mouth, but nothing happened to his eyes. He said, "How are you? I thought you'd forgotten me." It should have been a jest, but it wasn't. I felt uncomfortable. "It's so damn dark in here," I said, and dragged him out into the sunshine of the street. His arm felt very thin. "Straight over to Lucy's for a drink?" I was prattling and knew it. "We can talk there. Listen, Charles, you've been ill, haven't you? I can see it. Why didn't you let me know?" He didn't answer, and I went on babbling rubbish, trying to talk myself out of the apprehensiveness which seemed to be oozing out of him and wrapping itself around the pair of us like a grey fog. I kept looking at him as we walked past the barber's and reached the corner and turned towards Melrose and its rushing river of traffic. He was looking straight ahead of him. He was extraordinarily thin. He must have lost 20 pounds, and he'd never been fat. I kept wishing I could see his eyes again, and then being glad I couldn't. We stood on the curb by the auto park and waited a chance to cross Melrose. The sun was low now, and I was shading my eyes from it when Charles spoke for the first time. "I can use that drink," he said, but he still didn't look at me. I half turned to get the sun out of my eyes and noticed the briefcase for the first time. It was tucked firmly under his left arm and clamped tightly to his side. Even beneath his sleeve I could see an unusual tensing of the wasted muscles. I was going to say something, but a break came in the traffic and Charles plunged out into the road ahead of me. It was cool in Lucy's bar and almost empty. I wondered if the barman would remember Charles, then recalled that he'd only been here a couple of months. We ordered a gin and tonic for me and a whiskey sour for Charles, which he put down in a couple of gulps. "Another," he said. He was looking at the pack of cigarettes in his hand. "Mine's long," I said. "Miss me this time." While I finished my tall glass, he had 2 more whiskey sours, the second with an absinthe float. I chatted heavily. Charles didn't help, with the briefcase tucked under his arms and clamped against his side. He looked like a starving bird with one wing. I bought another round and began to exchange my uneasiness for a sort of anger. I said, "Look here, this is damn ridiculous." I swiveled around on my stool and stared at him. He gave a small barking sound, which I suppose was meant to be a laugh. He said, "Ridiculous? Maybe that's not quite the word, my boy." He barked again, and I remembered his old laugh, a gargantuan affair, which would make strangers smile at 30 paces. My anger went, and the other feeling came back. "Look," I said, dropping my voice. "Tell me what's wrong, Charles. There's something awfully wrong. What is it?" He stood up suddenly and clicked his fingers at the barman. "2 more," he said, "and don't forget the absinthe on mine." He looked at me fully. His eyes were brighter now, but that didn't alter the look in them. I couldn't kid myself any more. It was fear. And even to me, who have not seen many varieties of this unpleasant ailment, a new mixture. Not in fact as before, but a new fear. A fear which transcended all known variations upon the fear theme. I suppose I sat there gaping at him, but he didn't look at me any more. He clamped the briefcase under his arm and turned away. "Phone," he said. "Back in a minute." He took a step and then halted, turning his head to speak to me over his shoulder. He said, "Seen the Archers lately?" And then he was gone. That's exactly what he said, but at that time I thought I must have misheard him, because I didn't know any Archers. 25 years before, there'd been a John Archer at school with me, but I hadn't known him well and hadn't liked what I did know. I puzzled over this for a moment, then went back to my problem. What was the matter with Charles? Where had he been all this time? Why didn't anyone hear from or about him? Above all, what was he afraid of? And why should I be feeling, in the most extraordinary way, that life was a thin crust upon which we all moved perilously? The barman, a placid crust walker, set a new drink down in front of me and said something about the weather. I answered him eagerly, diving into a sunny sanctuary of platitude. It did me good until Charles came back. I watched him cross the room and didn't like it. His clothes hung loose about him, with room for another Charles inside them. He picked up his drink and drained it. He drank with his left hand because the briefcase was under his right arm now. I said, "Why don't you put that thing down? What's in it anyway? Nuggets?" He shifted it under the other arm and looked at me for a moment. He said, "Just some papers. Where are you dining?" "With you," I made a quick mental cancellation. "Or you are with me, rather." "Good," he nodded jerkily. "Let's get a booth now. One of the end ones." I stood up. "Okay, but if we're going to drink any more, I'll switch to a martini." He gave the order, and we left the bar, and in a minute were facing each other in a far corner booth. Charles looked right at me now, and I couldn't get away from his eyes and what was in them. A waiter came with the drinks and put them in front of us and went away. I looked down at mine and began to fool with the toothpick which spared the olive. "You're not a moron," he said suddenly, "nor a cabbage. Ever wake up in the morning and know you know the key, but when you reach for it, you can't remember it? It was just there." He made a vague, sharp gesture in the air, close to his head. "But it's gone. The minute you're waking, mind reaches for it. Ever do that? Ever feel that? Not only when you wake, maybe. Perhaps at some other sort of time?" He was looking down at the table now, and I didn't have to see his eyes. He was looking down at his hands, claw-like, as they fiddled with brass locks on the briefcase. I said, "What are you talking about? What key?" I was deliberately dense. His eyes blazed at me with some of the old Carolean fire. "Listen, numbskull," he spoke without opening his teeth. "Have you, at any moment in your wretched existence, ever felt that you knew, only a moment before, the answer to everything? To the colossal why of the universe? To the myriad questions entailed by the elaborate creation of man? To everything, you damned fool!" I stopped pretending. "Once or twice," I said. "Maybe more than that. You mean that awful sensation that you're on the verge of knowing the universal answer, and know it's amazingly simple, and you wonder why you never thought of it before, and then you find you don't know it at all. It's gone, snatched away, and you go practically out of your mind trying to get it back, but you never succeed. That's it, isn't it? I've had the feeling several times, notably coming out of the ether. Everyone has. Why? He was fiddling with the briefcase again. Why what? He said dully. The momentary flash of the old fire had died away. But I kept at him. I said, "You can't start something like that and then throw it away. Why did you bring the subject up? Did you finally grab the key this morning, or did it bite you, or what?" He still didn't look up. He went on fiddling with the brass locks on the case. "For God's sakes, leave that thing alone." My irritation was genuine enough. "It's getting on my nerves. Sit on it or something, if it's so precious, but quit fiddling." He stood up suddenly. He didn't seem to hear me. "Phone again," he said. "Sorry, forgot something. Won't be long." He started away, then turned and slapped the case down in front of me. "Have a look through it. Might interest you." And he was gone. I put my hands on the case and was just going to slip the locks back with my thumbs when a most extraordinary sensation permeated me, is the only word I can think of. I was suddenly extremely loath to open the thing. I pushed it away from me with a quick involuntary gesture, as if it were hot to the touch, and immediately I was ashamed of this childish behaviour and took myself in hand, and in a moment had it open and the contents spread in front of me. They were mostly papers, and all completely innocuous and unrelated. If you tried for a year, you couldn't get together a less alarming collection. There was a programme from the Frohman Theatre, New York, for a play called Every Other Friday, which I remembered seeing in 31. There was a letter from the secretary to the Dean of Harvard, with several pages of names attached to it, saying that in answer to Mr. Moffett's letter, he would find attached the list he had requested of the alumni of 1925. There was a letter from the manager of a Fifth Avenue apartment house, courteously replying to Mr. Moffett's request for a list of the tenants of his penthouse during the years 1933 to 35. There were several old bills from a strange miscellany of stores, a folded page from an old school magazine containing the photographs of the football team of CMI in the year 1919, and a page torn from Who's Who, around one entry of which heavy blue pencil lines had been drawn. And that finished the papers. There were only three other things: an empty, much-worn photograph frame of leather, a small silver plate, obviously unscrewed from the base of some trophy, with the names Charles Moffett and T. Perry, Devonshire, inscribed upon it, and an old briar pipe with a charred bowl and broken mouthpiece, but a shiny new silver band. The photograph frame stared up at me from the white tablecloth. I picked it up, and as I did so was struck by a sudden but undefinable familiarity. I turned it over in my hands, struggling with the elusive memory shape, and I saw that, although the front of it bore every sign of considerable age and usage, it had never been in fact used. It was one of those frames which you undo at the back to insert the photograph, and pasted across the joint between the body of the frame and the movable part was the original price tag. Very old and very dirty, but still bearing the dim figures $5.86. I was still looking at it when Charles came back. "Remember it?" he said. I twisted the thing about, trying to find a new angle to look at it from. He said, "It used to be on my desk. You've seen it hundreds of times." I began to remember. I could see it sitting beside a horseshoe ink pot, but I couldn't see what was inside it. I said, "I can't think what was in it." And then I remembered. But there can't have been anything. I turned the thing over and showed him the price tag. I was suddenly conscious of personal fear. "Charles," I said, "what the hell is all this?" He spoke, but he didn't answer me. He picked up the collection of nonsense and put it back into the briefcase. "Did you look at all the stuff?" he said. I nodded, watching him. It seemed that we never looked at each other squarely, for his eyes were upon his hands. "Did it suggest anything?" he said. "Not a thing. How could it?" I saw that the knuckles of his interlocked fingers were white. "Look here, Charles, if you don't tell me what all this is about, I'll go out of my mind." And then the head waiter came. He smiled at me and bowed gravely to Charles and asked whether we wished to order. I was going to tell him to wait, but Charles took the menu, and looked at it and ordered something, so I did the same. It was nearly dark outside now, and they put on the lights. People were beginning to come in, and there was quite a murmur of talk from the bar. I held my tongue. The moment had passed. I must wait for another. They brought cocktails, and we sipped them, and smoked, and didn't speak until Charles broke the silence. He said then, much too casually, "So you haven't been seeing much of the Archers?" "Charles," I said carefully, "I don't know anyone called Archer. I never have, except an unpleasant little tick at school." Our eyes met now, and he didn't look away. But a waiter came with hors d'oeuvres. I refused them, but Charles heaped his plate and began to eat with strange voracity. "These Archers," I said at last. "Who are they? Anything to do with this trouble you seem to have?" He looked at me momentarily, then down at his plate again. He finished what was on it and leaned back and gazed at the wall over my right shoulder. He said, "Adrien Archer was a great friend of mine." He took a cigarette from the pack on the table and lit it. "He was also a friend of yours." The waiter came again and took away my full plate and Charles' empty one. "What did you say?" I wasn't trusting my ears. He took the briefcase from the seat beside him and groped in it and brought his hand out holding the extract from Who's Who. "Look at this." He handed me the sheet. "That's Adrian's father." I took the paper but went on staring at him. His eyes were glittering. "Go on," he said. "Read it." The marked entry was short and prosaic. It was the history, in 7 lines, of an Episcopalian minister named William Archibald Archer. I read it carefully. I ought to have been feeling, I suppose, that Charles was a sick man, but I wasn't feeling anything of the sort. I can't describe what I was feeling. I read the thing again. "Look here, Charles," I said. "This man had 3 daughters. There's no mention of a son." "Yes," said Charles. "I know." He twitched the paper out of my hand and fished in the briefcase again and brought out the little silver plate. He said, "In 29 I won the doubles in the Lakeside tennis tournament. Adrien Archer was my partner." His voice was flat and the words without any emphasis. He handed the piece of metal across to me and once more I read Charles Moffett, T. Perry, Devonshire. And then the waiter was with us again, and for the longest half-hour of my life I watched Charles devour his food, while I pushed mine aside and drank a glass of wine. I watched him eat. I couldn't help myself. He ate with a sort of desperate determination, like a man clutching at the one reality. Then at last the meal was over, with even the coffee gone and just brandy glasses before us. He began to talk, not in the guarded, jerky way he had been using, but with words pouring out of him. He said, "I'm going to tell you the story of Adrien Archer, straight. He was a contemporary of ours, in fact. I was at CMI and Harvard with him. It was settled he should be a lawyer, but a year after he left Harvard, he suddenly went on the stage. His father and all his friends, you included, advised him not to. But Adrien didn't pay attention. He just smiled with that odd, secret smile he'd use sometimes. He just smiled, and his rise to what they call fame was what they call meteoric. In 3 years he was a big name on Broadway. In 4 he was another in London. In 6 they were billing his name before the title of the play. And in the 8th, Hollywood grabbed him and made what they call a star out of him in a period they call overnight. That was 4 years ago. Same year that you and I first came out here. We were both at RKO when he made his terrific hit in Judgment Day, playing the blind man. For the first time I interrupted. "Charles," I said. "Charles, I saw Judgment Day. Spencer Tracy played—" "Yes," said Charles, "I know. When Adrien came to Hollywood, you and I were awfully glad to see him, and when Margaret came to join him and brought the kid, and we'd installed them comfortably in a house on the Santa Monica Palisades, everything was fine." He drained the brandy in his glass and tipped some more into it from the bottle. The single lamp on the table threw sharp angled shadows across his face. He said, Well, there they were. Adrien went from success to success in things like The Key Above the Door, Fit for Heroes, and Sunday's Children. He stopped again and looked directly at me. "I'm sorry for you," he said suddenly. "It's a bad spot to be in, meeting an old friend and finding he's gone out of his mind and pretending to listen while your mind's busy with doctors' names and phone numbers." I said, "I don't know what I think, except that I'm not doubting your sanity, and I can't understand why I'm not." I wish he'd stop looking at me now, but his eyes didn't leave my face. He said, "Seen the Mortimers lately?" I jumped as if he'd hit me, but I answered in a minute. "Of course I have," I said. "I see him all the time. Frank and I have been working together. Matter of fact, I had dinner there only last night." His mouth twisted into the shape of a smile. "Still living on the Palisades, are they? 107 Paloma Drive?" "Yes." I tried to keep my voice steady. "They bought that place, you know." "Yes," said Charles. "I know. The Archers had the next house, 109. You found it, actually. Adrien liked it all right, and Margaret and the boy were crazy about it. Especially the pool." He drank some more brandy, and there was a long, sharp-edged silence, but I wouldn't say anything, and he began again. He said, "Do you remember when you were at MGM 2 years ago? You were revamping that Richard the Lionheart job, and you had to go to Del Monte on location." I nodded. I remembered very well. "That," said Charles, "was when it happened. The Mortimers gave a cocktail party. At least that's what it started out to be, but it was after midnight when I left with the Archers. I'd parked my car at the corner of Paloma and Palisade, right outside their house. So I walked along with them and went in for a nightcap. It was pretty hot, and we sat on the patio, looking over the swimming pool. There weren't any servants up, and Adrien went into the house for the drinks. He'd been very quiet all night, and not, I thought, looking particularly fit. I said something casual about this to Margaret, and then was surprised when she took me up very seriously. She said, 'Charles, he's worried, and so am I.' I remember looking at her and finding that her eyes were grave and troubled as I've never seen them. 'Charles,' she said, 'he's frightened, and so am I.'" Charles broke off again. He pulled out a handkerchief, and I saw that sweat was glistening on his forehead. He said, "Before I could say anything, Adrien came out with a tray and put it down and began mixing drinks. He looked at Margaret and asked what we'd been talking about and wouldn't be put off. She looked apprehensive when I told him, but he didn't seem to mind. He gave us both drinks and took one himself, and suddenly asked me a question I asked you earlier this evening." "About the key?" My voice surprised me. I hadn't told it to say anything. Charles nodded, but he didn't go on. "Then what?" said my voice. "Then what?" "It's funny," he said, "but this is the first time I've told all this, and I've just realized I should have begun at the other end and said I was worried and frightened, because I was, had been for weeks." A frightful feeling of verification swept over me. I said excitedly, "By God, I remember. About the time I went on location, you were sort of down. You had a polo spill. I was a bit worried about you, but you said you were okay." For a moment I thought he was going to break. Charles Moffett looked, as if he were going to weep. But he took hold of himself, and the jaw muscles in his face stood out like wire rope. He said, "The doctor said I was all right, but I wasn't, not by a mile. There was only one thing wrong with me, but that was plenty. I wasn't sleeping. It may have been something to do with the crack on the head, or it may not. But whatever it was bad, very bad, and dope made no difference, except perhaps for the worse. I'd go to sleep all right, but then I'd keep waking up, and that was the bad part, because every time I'd wake, that goddamn key would be a little nearer. At first it wasn't so worrying, merely an irritation, but as it went on, stronger and stronger, 3 and 4 and 6 times a night, well, it was bad. He stopped abruptly. His tongue seemed to be trying to moisten his lips. He took a swallow of brandy and then, incredibly, a long draught of water. The film of sweat was over his forehead again, and he mopped at it absent-mindedly with the back of his hand. He said, "So there you are, and we're back again." Half in moonlight, half in shadow, on Adrien's patio. And he's just asked me the question, and Margaret is leaning forward, her chin cupped in her hands, and I can feel her eyes on my face. And I'm staring at Adrien in amazement that he should ask me whether I know what it's like to feel that you're coming nearer and nearer to the answer. That simple ABC answer, which has always eluded man. The answer which is forbidden to man, but which, when it's dangled in front of his nose, like a donkey's carrot, he's bound to clutch for desperately. We were pretty full of drink, you know what the Mortimer hospitality's like, and once I'd got over the awful shock of egotistical surprise at finding that another man, my greatest friend to boot, was being ridden by a demon I'd considered my own personal property, we began to talk 30 to the dozen, while Margaret turned those great dark eyes upon us in turn. There was fear in them, but we went on, theorizing to reduce our fear, and traced the key awareness back to our adolescence, and wondered why we'd never told each other about it at school, and gradually, with the decanter getting lower and lower, and the impossible California moon beginning to pale, began to strive to put into words what we thought might be the shape of the key. We didn't get very far, and we didn't make much sense. Who can, when they're talking about things for which there are no words? But we frightened ourselves badly, and Margaret. We began to talk, or Adrien did, rather, because he was much nearer than I'd ever been. We began to talk about the feeling that made it all the more essential to grasp the thing, the feeling that the knowledge wasn't allowed. And Margaret suddenly jumped to her feet, and a glass fell from the wicker table and smashed on the tiles with a thin, shivering ring. I can remember what she said. I can hear her say it any time I want to, and many times when I don't. She looked down at us, and she seemed, I remember, to look very tall, although she was a little woman. She said, "Look at it all! Look!" And she made a great sweeping gesture with her arms towards everything in the world outside this little brick place where we were sitting. And then she said, "Leave it there. Leave it." Charles shivered like a man with ague, and then he took hold of himself. I could see the jaw muscles again, and the shine of the sweat on his forehead. He said at last. Margaret sort of crumpled up and fell back into her chair. She looked small again, and tears were rolling slowly down her cheeks. I know she didn't know there were any tears. She sat with her head up and her arms on the edge of the table, and stared out at the world beyond the swimming pool, the world which was turning from solid moonshot darkness to vague and nebulous and unhappy grey. Adrien got up. He sat on the arm of a chair and put an arm round her shoulders, and laid his cheek against her hair. They were very still and absolutely silent. I couldn't stand it, and went into the house and found Adrien's cellar and a couple of bottles of Perrier Jouet. It was 28, I remember, and put some ice in a pail and found some glasses and took my loot back to the patio. They were still exactly as I'd left them, and I shouted at them to break that immobility. I didn't like it. It broke all right, and I fooled around with the pail and the bottles and began talking a streak, and at last shoved some wine down their throats and put away half a pint at a swallow myself, and started in to be very funny. Adrien began to help me, and we played the fool and drank the second bottle, and he found a third, and at last we got Margaret laughing, and then he stole the curtain with a very nice swan dive from the patio wall into the pool, ruining a good dinner jacket in the process. It was nearly dawn when I left, and they both came around to the front of the house to see me off, and Margaret asked me to come to lunch, and I said I would, and waved at them and started the car, and that was all. He didn't stop abruptly this time. His voice and words just trailed softly into silence. He sat looking straight at me, absolutely still. I wanted to get away from his eyes, but I couldn't. The silence went on too long. I said, "Go on, I don't understand. What do you mean, that was all?" He said, "I didn't see the Archers any more. They weren't there. They weren't." I heard Margaret's voice again, but it only said one word, and then more silence. I said, finding some words, "I don't understand. Tell me." He dropped his eyes while he found a cigarette and lit it. He said, "There's a lot in slang. As Chesterton once pointed out, the greatest poet of 'em all is Demos. The gag man or gangster or rewrite man who first used the phrase 'rub him out' said a whole lot more than he knew. Because that's what's happened to Adrien. He was rubbed out, erased, deleted in all 3 dimensions of time, cancelled, made not." "You can't stop in the middle like that. Tell me what you're talking about. What do you mean?" He still looked at me. "I mean what I said. After that morning, there was no more Adrien. He was rubbed out. Remember the things in the briefcase? Well, they help to explain. After it happened, I was sort of ill. I've no idea for how long, but when I could think again, I set out on a sort of crusade to prove to myself that I was the only living thing which remembered, which knew there'd ever been such an entity as Adrien Archer. Mind you, I hoped to disprove it, though I felt all the time I never would. And I haven't. You saw those papers and things. They're just an infinitesimal fraction of my proof. There was an Adrien Archer, but now there never has been. That photograph frame used to have his and Margaret's pictures in it, but now there's the old price tag to show it's never been opened. That pipe, Adrien gave it to me and my initials were on it, in facsimile of his writing, but now the band's plain and bare and new. Adrien Archer was at school and college with me, but no records show the name, and no contemporary mind remembers. I've known his father since I was a pup, but his father knows he never had a son. There were pictures, photographs in which Adrien and I both were, sometimes together, and now those same pictures show me with someone whom everyone knows, but me. On the programmes of all his plays, there's another man listed for his part, and that man is a known and living man in every case, a man who knows he played the part, and remembers doing it as well as the other people. You, for instance, remember his playing it. The pictures he made are all available to be seen, but there's no Adrien in them. There's some other star who remembers everything about playing the part, and has the weeks he took in shooting intricately woven into his life pattern. Adrien and everything that was Adrien's have been removed and replaced. He isn't, and won't be, and never has been. He was cancelled in the esse and posse, taken out of our little life and time and being like a speck out of yeast, and over the hole which the speck made the yeast has bubbled and seethed and closed, and there never was any speck, except to the knowledge of another speck. A speck who was almost as near to the danger point of accidental knowledge as the one which was removed, a speck whose punishment and warning are memory. "Tell me," I said, "tell me what happened after you drove away." "My God!" said Charles, and there seemed to be tears in his eyes. "My God, you're believing me!" "I'll tell you. I drove home. I was so tired, I thought I might really sleep. I tore off my clothes and rolled into bed after I'd pulled the blinds tight down against the sun, which would be up in a few minutes. And I did sleep. I put a note on the door for my servant not to wake me, and he didn't. But the telephone did, and I cursed and rolled over and groped for it without opening my eyes. And then I heard Margaret's voice, calling my name. I knew it was her voice, though it was shrill and harsh with wild, incredible terror. It called my name over and over again. And then, when I answered, it said, "Adrian's." And then, without any other sound, without any click or noise or any sound at all, she wasn't there. I didn't waste any time. I slammed the phone down and nothing flat. I was in the car and racing up Sunset, past the Riviera. I took the turn into Paloma Drive on 2 wheels and went on, around those endless curves at well over 60, and I came past the Mortimer's house to the corner of Paloma and Palisade. I interrupted again in that voice which didn't feel like mine. "Wait, I've remembered something. You say this house was on the corner of Palisade Avenue and Paloma Drive, next the Mortimers. Well, there isn't any house there. There's a little park place there. A garden." "Yes," said Charles, "I know. That's what you know. What everyone knows. What the urban records would prove. But there, right on that corner, had been a white colonial house, which you got for the Archers, and out of which I had come only a few hours before. It was glaring, monstrous impossibility, and a brutal, inescapable fact. The green grass and the red flowers blazed at me with appalling reality, flaunting neat and well tended and matured beauty, and the little white railings and the odd-shaped green seats and yellow gravel paths and the spraying fountain all stared at me with smug actuality. I stopped the car somehow. I knew I was on the right road because I'd seen Mary Mortimer talking to a gardener in front of their house. I was shaking all over, and fear had me by the guts with a cold claw which twisted. I fumbled at the car door. I had to have air. The sunshine was bright and golden, but it was filthy somehow. It was like the light which might be shed by some huge undreamt of reptile. I had to have air, though. I stumbled out onto the sidewalk and staggered across it towards one of the seats by the fountain, and my foot caught against something, and there was a sharp pain in my leg, and I looked down. I'd run my shin onto one of those little metal signs they stick up on lawns, and the plate was bent back so that the white printing on the green background was staring up at me. It said, "Keep off the grass." The crust felt thin beneath my feet. I knew he wasn't going to say any more, but I kept expecting him to. We sat for a long time, while a waiter came and cleared away and spread a clean cloth and finally went. "Just a minute," said Charles suddenly. "I have to phone again." He walked away, and I went on sitting. In half an hour the waiter came back. I asked him where Mr. Moffett was. Surely not still in the phone booth. He stared. "Mr. who, sir?" I said after a long pause, but very sharply, "Mr. Moffett, the gentleman who was dining with me." He didn't seem to know what I was talking about. I wonder how much longer there is for me.